He rounded the bend just before sunset, the sky ablaze with reds and golds that painted the rolling plains in hues of fire. His boots kicked up dust as he urged his horse forward, knowing that this ride would change his life forever. The rancher, known to most as Jacob Boone, was a man of silent strength and quiet resolve. He had spent his life tending to his family's land, living by a strict code of honor handed down through generations. But today his code was about to lead him to a collision course with a reality he could no longer ignore. A reality where compassion would demand he break the iron claws of custom. She sat chained to the wagon, her wrists raw from the iron claws that bit into her skin, and her eyes glistened with tears that the hard crevices of her cheeks could not hold. Her name was Evelyn Harper, a woman of fierce spirit and unyielding faith in her own dreams. She had refused to marry the man her father had chosen for her, a wealthy landowner whose legacy promised comfort but demanded the sacrifice of her freedom. Evelyn's heart had known none of freedom more precious than the right to choose her own path, and so she had drawn a line in the sand. They had responded with shackles. Jacob's heart clenched when he saw her. He had heard whispers of the spectacle, watched as townsfolk cast sideways glances, some sneering, some pitying. But only when he saw Evelyn's form beneath the dying light did he truly understand the depth of her suffering. He felt a rage that roared in his chest, a familiar ache that told him this was not just about a woman in chains. It was about justice, about compassion, about shining a light into the darkness of outdated customs. As he tethered his horse to a post, he saw the torches carried by her father's men flickering in the gathering dusk, a cruel reminder of the price placed on her defiance. Evelyn saw him approach, her breathing ragged, but her spirit unbroken. She glared at the man standing before her, not with fear, but with fierce hope. His eyes, a deep shade of amber, held her gaze without judgment. She straightened her back, defiant, refusing to lower her eyes. In that moment, Jacob knew that he would not be merely an observer of her pain. He would be the force that shattered it. Without a word, Jacob reached for the lantern that hung at his saddle, its light flickering like a heartbeat. He lifted it high, casting its glow over the area. Evelyn's eyes widened as he knelt beside her, the lantern's gentle warmth illuminating the cold steel that bound her. He glanced around, ensuring no one stood between them, and then took a deep breath. He yanked the hatchet from his belt, its blade honed and ready. Evelyn watched as his rugged hands, calloused from years of ranch work, gripped the handle with unwavering determination. The first swing rang out like a clarion call, the hatchet connecting with iron in a resonant clash that echoed across the plain. Sparks flew as metal yielded to steel, the chain cracking in multiple places. Evelyn's breath caught in her throat, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and disbelief. The second swing shattered the remaining links, sending shards of metal scattering like fallen stars. She stared at Jacob, tears threatening to spill over, but they did not. Instead, her chest heaved with a breath she did not realize she had been holding, and she felt the iron grip around her wrist loosen and fall away with a clatter that sounded nearly like music. He rose and extended his hand. "Come with me," he said, his voice a gravelly whisper that carried both apology and promise. Evelyn hesitated only briefly, her mind struggling to catch pace with the flood of relief surging through her veins. Then she grasped his hand, her fingers brushing against his rough skin, and for the first time in days, she felt anchored by something other than steel. She stood, her knees wobbly beneath her, and took a step away from the wagon. Behind her, the setting sun bathed the plain in a final golden glow, as if blessing her escape. As they walked away, Jacob placed his leather-clad arm around her shoulders. She leaned into him, the weight of her fear lifting with each stride. She could not remember the last time she felt truly safe, at home in her own skin, until this very moment. The air was alive with the scent of juniper and sagebrush, carried on a breeze that whispered through the tall grass like a lullaby. Evelyn looked up at Jacob, her eyes still glistening. "Why did you help me?" she asked softly, her voice trembling with unasked questions. He met her gaze, the fading sun reflecting in his eyes like embers. "Because freedom is worth more than tradition," he replied. There was no bravado in his tone, no grand declarations, just the quiet conviction of a man who believed in doing what was right. Evelyn nodded, absorbing his words, feeling them settle into the depths of her soul like seeds ready to bloom. They rode off together into the golden dusk, the wagons and torches of her father's men visible in the distance. The shock on their faces as they realized Evelyn had slipped through their grasp was matched only by Jacob's unwavering determination. He urged his horse into a steady gallop, not to escape them, but to put enough distance between Evelyn and the life that had sought to cage her. The horses thundered beneath them, their hooves pounding the earth in a wild symphony of power and possibility. Evelyn clutched the reins with trembling strength, her hair billowing behind her like a banner of newfound defiance. With each mile they covered, her fear unraveled into hope, and hope bloomed into something fierce and unbreakable. She envisioned a life unburdened by expectations, where she could chart her own course. Jacob glanced at her and offered a small smile, as if he too could fathom the expanse of freedom that lay before them. Night descended like a velvet curtain studded with stars, the sky a tapestry of silver points that shimmered with promise. Jacob guided Evelyn to his humble ranch, a modest cluster of weathered structures protected by the vast prairies that stretched as far as the eye could see. The main ranch house stood strong, its walls thick with the stories of generations past. He led her inside, where a simple room awaited, a bed with patchwork quilts and a window that framed the boundless night sky. For the first time since she had been shackled, Evelyn felt the stirrings of peace within her chest. Days turned into weeks. Evelyn awakened each morning to the chorus of meadowlarks, their songs weaving through the air like ribbons of hope. She learned the rhythm of ranch life, feeding the horses at dawn, mending fences in the afternoon sun, and tending to the garden that flourished under her careful touch. Jacob watched her, admiration and something deeper blooming in his chest. He admired her resilience, the way she carried herself with dignity despite the scars, both visible and hidden, of her past. One evening, as the sky transitioned from pink to indigo, Jacob brought Evelyn to the edge of a cliff that overlooked a valley of wild grasses dancing in the breeze. The moon rose, bathing the landscape in a soft glow. Evelyn stood beside him, her eyes reflecting the celestial light above. She felt a peace she had never known, as if the night itself sang a lullaby that cradled her soul. "Why did you risk everything for me?" she whispered, her voice barely audible above the rustle of the wind. Jacob's gaze swept across the horizon before settling on her. "Because everyone deserves a chance to choose their own destiny," he said quietly. "Because I believe in a world where people can be more than what they were born into. I believe in you, Evelyn." His words were simple, yet they carried a gravity that settled deep within her heart. Tears streamed down Evelyn's cheeks, but they were not tears of sorrow. Rather, they were cleansing waters that washed away the remnants of fear and pain. She turned to Jacob, her hand reaching for his, and laced her fingers through his calloused ones. "I don't know how to thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. He shook his head, his thumb brushing gently across her knuckles. "Just live your life. Be free. That's thanks enough." His words wrapped around her like a warm embrace, and in that moment, Evelyn realized her life had been given a new thread, one spun from courage, compassion, and the promise of tomorrow. Seasons shifted. Winter's frost gave way to spring's gentle thaw. The ranch transformed. Snowmelt fed the creeks, the earth softened, and wildflowers carpeted the meadows in a riot of colors. Evelyn discovered talents she had never known. She could coax a calf to nurse with a gentle touch, whisk bread into golden loaves that filled the kitchens with warmth, and soothe the anxiety of a frightened horse with a voice that trembled but never wavered. Through it all, Jacob was her steadfast companion. He taught her the art of horsemanship, guiding her as she climbed into the saddle and trusted her instincts to guide the horse across the wide-open terrain. He shared stories of his ancestors, stories of hardship, perseverance, and dreams that had defied the odds. Evelyn listened, absorbing each tale like a parched flower soaking in rain. One afternoon, as they gathered eggs from the chicken coop, they paused to watch a storm roll across the horizon. Dark clouds churned above, rumbling softly as if the heavens themselves spoke in low whispers. Evelyn's heart swelled with something new, an ache of belonging so profound it took her breath away. She turned to Jacob, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "I never knew life could be like this," she murmured. "I thought freedom was just a word, but it's so much more." Jacob smiled, his face illuminated by the last rays of sun breaking through the clouds. "Freedom is something you carry in your soul," he said. "Not just a place, but a promise you keep to yourself." They walked back to the ranch as the first droplets of rain fell, their footsteps soft upon the damp ground. Evelyn's heart felt light, as though the shackles of her past had been buried forever. She glanced at Jacob, feeling a warmth that went beyond the sun's embrace, something that pulsed with every beat of her heart. The years that followed were not always easy. Drought struck the plains, threatening the vitality of the ranch. Markets crashed, and neighbors struggled to survive. But through every trial, Jacob and Evelyn stood side by side. They rallied the community, offering aid to those in need, sharing food, mending fences together. Evelyn led efforts to plant deep-rooted crops that survived the dry spells, while Jacob negotiated fair deals to sustain their livelihood. In moments of despair, they found strength in each other's presence and the unwavering belief that together they could weather any storm. As they turned the corner into middle age, the ranch flourished once more. Lush pastures rolled beneath a blue sky so vast it felt like a promise. Their love deepened. It was quiet and steady, like the slow burn of embers that refused to die. Evelyn bore a child, a daughter with her mother's deep brown eyes and her father's unwavering spirit. Holding her daughter in her arms, Evelyn understood the true gift of freedom, the power to love, to nurture, to build a life unbound by fear. On the eve of their daughter's first birthday, the family gathered on the porch of the ranch house. The horizon blazed with the dying light of another sun, and the world seemed to hold its breath in the hush of twilight. Jacob wrapped an arm around Evelyn, his hand resting on her pregnant belly as she whispered to their sleeping baby. Together they watched the sky transform, each color a testament to the journey that had brought them here. Evelyn's thoughts drifted back to the day she had sat chained to that wagon, the day her world had been wrapped in iron and shame. She traced the outlines of her scars with her fingertips, feeling the sharp ridges beneath her skin, and knew that they were not signs of weakness, but reminders of her resilience. She closed her eyes, breathing in the scent of sage and chimney smoke, and for a moment, she allowed herself to feel the full depth of her gratitude. Gratitude for the man who had shattered her chains, for the chance to build a life from the fragments of her broken past. "Do you ever wonder what would have become of me?" she asked Jacob softly, "if you had never come?" He kissed her forehead, his lips warm against her skin. "I don't like to think about that," he replied, "but I do know this. The world is better with you in it, free to be everything you were meant to become." Tears slid down Evelyn's cheeks and she leaned into him, her heart overflowing. In the glow of sunset, they stood together, two souls bound not by chains, but by love and unwavering devotion to one another, and the promise that freedom was worth any sacrifice. And so their story spread across the plains, the tale of a rancher who chose compassion over convention, who tore through tradition to rescue a woman's spirit. It became a legend whispered by mothers to their daughters, a reminder that even in a world bound by expectations, the heartbeat of freedom could never be silenced. Evelyn's name became synonymous with courage, a woman who refused to bow to fate and instead forged her own path. Jacob's became synonymous with honor, a man who understood that love and liberty were worth more than the chains of legacy. Evelyn's childhood memories were etched in her mind like faded photographs. She recalled the warmth of her mother's lullabies, melodies woven from hope and longing. Her father had been a stern man, proud, unyielding, a keeper of the old ways. He believed in alliances built by marriage, dynasty strengthened by union, and he saw her as a vessel to carry forward the family name. Yet within Evelyn lived a heart that beat to its own rhythm, a heart that yearned to write a story uncharted by anyone else's hand. Her defiance had grown like a wild vine, winding through her spirit until it refused to be contained. She had dreamed of harnessing horses, of tending to the sick, of mightily steering her own destiny. But all that was deemed frivolous by the hardened eyes that saw only the value of her dowry. And so, one fateful afternoon, she donned a plain gown, her hair braided with ribbons of defiance, and refused to bow to the decree of her father. Her voice had trembled, but her words rang with clarity. She would not be caged. Jacob Boone had his own memories, memories of loss and longing that shaped his understanding of the world. He had loved once, years ago, a woman named Clara, whose laughter had been the music of his life. They had danced beneath cottonwood trees, their promises woven into the air like dandelion seeds on the wind. But Clara's life had been claimed by a fever, and Jacob had been left to navigate the vast emptiness that followed her passing. He had buried his grief with the work of the ranch, pouring sweat and salt into the soil, trying to cultivate meaning from the dust. When he saw Evelyn in chains, something in him stirred, a resurgence of that old ache that told him life was too sacred to be confined by cruelty. The seasons passed in a blur of dust and sunlight. Each morning, Evelyn rose before dawn, her breath forming a mist in the crisp air as she fed the horses. She learned their names one by one. Valor, a chestnut stallion with a white blaze like a lightning bolt. Willow, a gentle mare whose coat shimmered like silver under the moon. And Dusty, a cunning gelding whose spirit matched Evelyn's own rebellious heart. She spoke to them in hushed tones, telling them of the life she envisioned. A life not set in stone by ancestral decree, but carved with her own hands. On balmy afternoons, she would sit by the creek that ran near the edge of the property, her feet dangling in cool water that slipped between her toes like silk. She found solace in the creek's gentle murmur, imagining it carried her wishes downstream to a world where her choices were her own. Jacob often found her there, the late afternoon sun painting her silhouette in gold. He would stand quietly, watching the sunlight dance upon her hair, and wonder at the transformation he had witnessed in her, from a broken spirit to a woman of untamed hope. Evelyn's presence on the ranch brought the community together in unexpected ways. Neighbors who once eyed Jacob with curiosity now saw the kindness in his actions, the depth of his conviction to fight for what was right. They came to Evelyn's side when harvest threatened to fail, offering their hands to gather wheat and tend to cattle. She learned their stories, how Mrs. Calloway's children had gone hungry during the drought, how Mr. Thompson's barn had collapsed under the weight of winter's snow, how the Johnson twins had lost their father to a fall from a cliff. Evelyn's empathy wove a tapestry of care that held everyone together. Jacob watched as Evelyn became a beacon, her laughter like a bell that rang across the plains, calling people to gather and share. He saw lives transformed by her empathy. The elderly man who sold eggs to feed his grandchildren, the widow who found solace in companionship over shared chores, the children whose eyes sparkled with wonder at stories of far-off lands. Evelyn's courage and compassion wove a tapestry that stretched far beyond the boundaries of the ranch, binding the community together in ways he had never imagined. One golden evening, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of tangerine, Jacob and Evelyn sat on the porch of the ranch house, cradling mugs of steaming coffee. Their daughter Lily, 2 years old now, giggled as she chased fireflies in the yard, her laughter a melody that rose above the hush of dusk. Evelyn leaned her head on Jacob's shoulder, her breathing calm in the peaceful twilight. She traced the lines on Jacob's weathered hands, recognizing in those lines the story of a man who had faced hardship and heartbreak and still chosen to uphold his convictions. Jacob tilted his head to meet her gaze. "Do you think Clara would be proud of me?" he asked quietly, his voice carrying the weight of unsaid apologies and lingering longing. Tears shimmered in Evelyn's eyes as she squeezed his hand. "She would be proud," she murmured, "because you never stopped believing in love, even when it hurt. You risked everything to give me a chance to live my own story. That's a love worth honoring." He nodded, his gaze drifting to Lily as she clapped her tiny hands, eyes wide with wonder at the light of a firefly. The sight stirred something deep within him, a fierce protectiveness that intertwined with gratitude. He realized that in saving Evelyn, he had also saved himself from the prison of regret and what-ifs. He had chosen to shatter tradition in order to preserve a soul, and in doing so, he had discovered a new reason to live, a reason bound in love and luminous with hope. As summer waned into autumn, the ranch took on a golden glow. Fields of wheat swayed like breath under the sky, and apple trees bowed with the weight of ripening fruit. Evelyn spent her days teaching Lily to press flowers between parchment, her fingers guiding the child's hands with patient tenderness. Jacob watched them, his heart swelling with a joy he had never thought possible. He wandered through the orchards, inhaling the scent of ripe apples and the promise of cider that would warm them through the coming season. Winter arrived with a fierce roar. Snow blanketed the plains, turning the world into a silent expanse of white. The wind howled like a restless spirit, rattling the windows and bearing fences beneath drifts. Evelyn and Jacob huddled by the hearth, the fire crackling with warmth as their daughter slept soundly upstairs. They spoke in hushed tones, voices weaving dreams of spring's return and the life they were building together. The cold could not touch them. Their love was a flame that defied even the fiercest winter's chill. In the depths of winter, tragedy struck. A fever swept through the area, claiming several souls, including Mrs. Calloway's youngest son, a boy who had been one of Lily's playmates. Evelyn sat at the boy's bedside, her hands pressing a cool cloth to his fevered forehead as his mother wept by the stove. Jacob stood watch in the hallway, his jaw clenched, fury simmering beneath the surface. He had fought for freedom in a singular moment, swinging a hatchet that broke iron and tradition, but now he faced a battle against an unseen foe that threatened to steal the light from their world. Evelyn refused to yield. She refused to let despair color her spirit. She read every medical book she could find, mixing herbs and poultices, whispering prayers into the night air. Jacob carried water and firewood, ensuring the boy's blankets remained warm and the room humid enough to ease his breathing. They took turns sleeping by his side, their bodies curled on chairs, heads nodding in exhaustion as they listened to the boy's labored breaths. Through it all, Evelyn held on to hope with a ferocity that mirrored the chain that had once bound her. And in the early hours of a silent morning, the boy's fever broke. He opened his eyes, pale but alive, blinking against the dawn's soft light. Evelyn wept, relief cascading through her like a waterfall. Jacob held her as she trembled, and in that embrace, they found a strength that transcended any adversity they faced. The boy recovered, and the town celebrated as though spring itself had arrived. They remembered once more that compassion could heal, that a community's heart could triumph over sorrow. Years passed. Lily grew into a young woman with her mother's spirit and her father's steadfast courage. She learned to ride horses with grace, her laughter echoing across the plains as she raced the wind. She studied medicine in the city, determined to carry her parents' legacy of healing into a broader world. Evelyn and Jacob watched her depart with pride and longing, knowing that their daughter would touch lives in ways they could only imagine. Eventually, the time came when Jacob's hands grew stiff with arthritis, and Evelyn's hair silvered with years of laughter and tears. The ranch, now thriving and teeming with life, became a refuge for travelers seeking solace. Evelyn taught classes in midwifery and herbal remedies, passing on the knowledge that had saved so many lives. Jacob became a figure of quiet wisdom, a pillar of the community whose decisions were sought by all. Together they held gatherings on warm summer nights, sharing stories by lantern light that wove the past into the present like threads of gold. On a crisp autumn evening, an old friend arrived, a man whose name was whispered with reverence, Thomas Harper, Evelyn's father. Age had softened his features, and guilt had etched lines deeper than any time could carve. He approached the porch with trepidation, his eyes falling on the woman he had once tried to bind to a life of compliance. Evelyn stood, her heart thundering with a mix of resentment and compassion. Thomas fell to his knees before her, tears spilling down his weathered face. "Evelyn," he whispered, his voice cracking with remorse, "I have lived a lifetime haunted by the chains I placed upon you. I see now the cruelty of my pride. Forgive me." Tears welled in Evelyn's eyes as she gazed at the man who had tried to shape her fate. She saw his sorrow, felt the weight of his regret. She took a step forward, her hand extending toward his trembling fingers. "I was once chained by your expectations," she said, her voice steady, "but I am free now because someone believed in me. My freedom is not yours to give or take, yet I choose to forgive you." She placed her hand atop his, and Thomas sobbed, relief rippling through his soul. Jacob stood behind Evelyn, his hand resting on her shoulder, offering silent support. Together, they had dismantled the iron bars of tradition and forged a community built on empathy and choice. Evelyn's forgiveness that day became another thread in the tapestry of their lives, a testament to the transformative power of compassion. Time marched on, and eventually Jacob's footsteps grew slow, his breath labored beneath the weight of years. Evelyn cared for him as he had cared for her, tending to his aches, singing to him in the stillness of dawn. On a summer morn, as golden sunbeams filtered through the curtains, Jacob slipped from the world, his spirit wandering free across the plains he had loved so dearly. Evelyn held his hand as he exhaled his final breath, her tears mingling with gratitude for a life shared. The ranch fell silent that day. The horses nickered softly, sensing the loss, and the wind carried a hush across the fields of wheat. Evelyn sat on the porch in Jacob's favorite chair, the chair that had embraced his broad shoulders and weathered frame for countless evenings. She closed her eyes and imagined his voice, warm and steady, urging her onward. "Be free," he had told her once, and she whispered those words into the breeze, letting them carry across the land. The community gathered, honoring Jacob with stories of his courage, recounting how he had chosen compassion over tradition in a moment that altered the course of many lives. They spoke of Evelyn, who had blossomed into a woman of remarkable spirit, a healer, a leader, and a beacon of hope. Evelyn spent her remaining years ensuring that Jacob's legacy endured. She mentored young ranchers, teaching them that strength lay not in domination, but in raising one another up. She guided women who had known confinement, helping them find paths through education and independence. She watched her grandchildren grow, their laughter mingling with the songs of meadowlarks, their futures unbound by shackles of expectation. On the eve of her 85th birthday, Evelyn walked to the cliff where Jacob had spoken of freedom. She raised a lantern to the sky, recalling the sound of chains shattering. The wind carried her whisper of gratitude across the plains. As stars emerged, she felt her life's final pulse slow, content that her legacy of love and liberation would endure in every heart brave enough to follow its own light. Eternally free, she smiled as the lantern swayed,